Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, The Cutting Edge Mitigating Broadcom's Impact on VMware. So obviously, this is a very hot topic, has been a very hot topic for a few months. Today, we're going to be covering the latest information on changes to the VMware licensing models under Broadcom's new leadership, but we'll focus specifically on a couple topics, how it's going to impact your organization, as well as how it's impacting cloud service providers like LightEdge. We're super excited to dig in and get the conversation started. So let's go. Thanks for giving us a good chunk of your time here on this Tuesday. So first, we'll start with introductions of our panelists. I'll start with myself. I'm Sean Stanger. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at LightEdge. I've been here about 9 years, responsible for our go-to-market efforts and strategies. We also have Duncan Wanamaker, who is a cloud architect with LightEdge, responsible for knowing exactly how the sausage is made with regards to our cloud platform. And then we have Rob Carter, who has been with LightEdge, joined LightEdge recently in the last 6 months, but has decades of experience both on the cloud service provider side, as well as an end user and chief executive responsible for IT and operations. So to kick off the conversation, Rob, how about you give us an overview or a quick view of that industry outlook, specifically maybe help set the stage a bit for what Broadcom and VMware have recently changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks all for joining. And thanks, Sean, for that. So yeah, if we think about it, why the change? Why are we having this conversation? It's Broadcom's bottom line. I mean, it's a publicly traded company. I just jumped on, looked, looks like they're up 24% year to date. They've announced a lot of price increases to the folks like ourselves, service providers, and then obviously the end of perpetual licensing. So a lot of you on the webinar or some of our customers, large co-location customers that aren't cloud customers, you do a one-time buy on your licenses, and then you pay an annual maintenance fee, typically 20%, of whatever that perpetual spend was, something to that effect. You're good until the end of your term. If your term's several years out, then you've got some time, and I think things will shake out a little bit more. The program's changing; it's evolving as we speak. Microsoft and others have already done this. So while it's not great if you've kind of invested in that model, it is not within the budget cycle. So that's an unfortunate thing for many of you and for us, because we did see significant price increases, which Sean will talk about in a moment. But yeah, if you think about your old Word version, now it's O365, and most of our software that we do use is now subscription based. They also changed VVF, we'll call it reimagined, and really what this is, it's a stripped down version now that they're allowing. So if you don't use NSX and you want to use limited vSAN, then you still might be able to go this route. There's less support. We'll call it, it's outdated tech, at least from the standpoint of, being able to leverage NSX and, virtual networking and microsegmentation, those type of things. So I think you could still ride it out for a bit with this. You obviously want to make sure you understand what direction you want to go. If you try to move to any other provider, which I'll talk about in a couple more slides, you're going to have to, deal with some of these technology changes anyway. So think about it. We'll help you evaluate that if you'd like, but at the end of the day, you still may have time to be able to go that route. But if you do use NSX or some of the other features in the vCloud Foundation, VCF bundle, then you want to have that conversation with us and we can help you through it. And then they did change from a RAM-based model to cores. So after we all spent, many years focused on, optimizing our servers for RAM, we now have realized that now we have to flip that and go back to cores. So that is creating a lot of work. I mean, I will tell you that the three of us on this call have spent more hours than I'd like to talk about figuring out what do our multi-tenant cloud pods look like, what do the private dedicated cloud pods or clouds look like for our customers, what is the impact of them, how do we how do we make sure that they maximize the licensing? Because it is a 16 core minimum now. So if you have hosts that have less than that, you are going to pay the penalty. You're paying 16 regardless. So a lot of sizing, a lot of changes to be able to optimize this. So, and again, I'll touch upon more of that in a moment, but at a high level, that's this, and then I'll flip it back over to Sean.
Yeah, and so I think, Rob, couple things maybe just to hammer home, like there's a lot of rumors, the rumor mill's running, right? And I think a couple of things that, couple key themes on these changes that we've heard. Hey, is our agreement going to get, our perpetual license agreement going to get canceled? We haven't heard that. Our understanding is that, you're on perpetual until that renewal is up. When it's time to renew, you're absolutely moving to the subscription model. And we'll talk a little bit about what that transition looks like. From what does VVF have? What does it not have? The short answer is, if you're not using NSX today and you're not using vSAN of certain storage pool sizes, it may not be a very disruptive change for you to stay on VVF. But there is certainly some complexities there. If you're using vSAN, exactly how much storage you can have per licensed core? Do you have to buy extra packages or extra cores of licensing? It can get complicated. So what we would definitely say is if you're used to a socket-based perpetual model, it's moving to cores. Make sure that you think through what those limitations or those minimums are, whether it's vSAN pool sizes, whether you're using NSX or not, or how many cores that you have per socket, so that you really make sure you make the most efficient use of the new licensing model when you move to it. So on the next slide, we've got a conversation a bit about what that financial impact could look like. And we've been fortunate enough to work with some of our clients already through these transitions as they've moved off a perpetual model and have started to get their pricing proposals and new agreements for the subscription model. So for those that were on a perpetual model, your annualized cost for that, which it may have been front loaded into year one with smaller 2 and 3 year costs. But if you look at just the annual average, those costs are looking like they might go up, double, in some cases 3 times, depending on, again, how many cores are in your sockets, right? So, hopefully these perpetual licenses are on a similar term or up for renewal, aligned to, your organization's host refresh. Of course, a lot of times it's not aligned, and so that can create some complexities or challenges. But if it is aligned, your hosts are due for refresh at the same time that the licensing is. You want to make sure, like Rob said, that you're looking at 16 cores or more per socket. That we're looking to have the right ratios of RAM to cores to minimize those cost increases. But like for like, right, just on a perpetual model, we've seen on average most of those annual costs just for the licensing is doubling. In some cases, where organizations have a lot of cores, maybe even cores they're not really using in their existing compute infrastructure stack, those licensing costs from perpetual to subscription are going up more in that 3x type neighborhood. But of course, there's an opportunity to make sure you partner with your value-added reseller to get the right design and the right efficiencies behind your infrastructure stack. But there will be a cost increase. For those that are on subscription models today, it's going to change a little bit, but it's really just being mindful of how those requirements, those minimums, those caveats, that's really what you're going to have to pay attention to make sure that you don't see significant annual cost increases. So the middle box really is an illustration of how, for those of you that are maybe working with a cloud service provider, and LightEdge might be your cloud service provider, you may be working with other ones as well. For a VMware powered cloud, especially a multi-tenant, those cost increases are going up. Like Rob said, the RAM centric model has moved to a core centric model for cloud service providers. And as a result, what we've seen on average is about an 80% increase in those licensing costs. And if you think about, hey, what are the options? Because of course we've got a lot of folks that are, especially reacting initially to some of the news and potentially some of the rumors around what's going on. Maybe it's time for us to just go ahead and move this stuff to the public cloud or look at a different virtualization technology altogether. And what I would tell you is that the cost increase over a DIY to just lift and shift, not take advantage of cloud native or platform native specific technologies, those are going to result in a cost increase over a DIY model certainly as well. So on the next slide, we're talking a bit about how LightEdge's customers, a cohort of customers have been impacted. And the good news is that with our experience in offering truly dedicated private cloud type solutions, we've really been able to mitigate those cost increases as a result of how Broadcom and VMware licensing models have changed for CSPs. So specifically, we're seeing somewhere between 0 and 5% price changes or increases for the licensing model component of that bill specifically. And we are seeing, obviously cost savings over that DIY model as well. So if you're, today owning the infrastructure stack, licensing that on a perpetual model today, going to the subscription model when your renewal is up, LightEdge's dedicated offering that, again, to Rob's point, is focused on the ratios between RAM and cores and proportions, are offering organizations about a 30% on average savings compared to that DIY when you look at annualized costs. So Rob, talk a little bit about on our next slide, when you think about the concerns of Broadcom's changes and what organizations are starting to think about alternatives, what insider guidance can you provide there?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, so you can look at these on the left side and we'll go through them real quick, but none of us likes to be forced into to most anything. Tech, pricing, you name it, right? And that's what's happening right now. And again, I say this because it's very while a lot of folks say, hey, you knew Broadcom was going to do this, the information was not provided until very late, and then we've all been running to try and figure this out. And so you start reading all the Reddit forums and all the other things that'll talk about the anger and whatnot. But you see vendor lock-in, like, oh, you shouldn't be locked into VMware. Well, let's be honest, we're committing ourselves to certain technologies, whether it's AWS or Azure or VMware or Nutanix. I mean, you are committing yourself to that tech. People have spent a lifetime getting certifications, and focusing their career around one of those, hypervisor, technologies or platforms, right? And that's always kind of been the case. And so yes, it's a high investment and there is a cost to switch. And I would say, the next one talks about public cloud concerns, and you hear a lot about repatriation and all of those things, but they're not so hidden. The fees aren't so hidden anymore around clouds, hidden fees. I mean, you just need to think about it from a total cost of ownership perspective. If you're going from your traditional, let's just say VMware-based solution today, and you want to move to another technology, in which we are weighing alternatives, like you see below, Nutanix as an example. And I think they have about 24% of the HCI market share, where VMware has almost 50%. At the end of the day, you have to pay to do a migration. Yes, there are some that make it easier to migrate. If you're trying to go to the public cloud, your costs around cloud native, that's the right way to leverage the public cloud. And you can go out and see pricing calculators. And I have personally managed a budget within Azure, and it was a massive bill and it was hard to control. And control really was the biggest thing I'd say for me as the budget owner prior. But the teams of people that you have to have, the DevOps, the developers, and staying up to date, that is a cost. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying you really need to think about that and the team dynamic that you have, and the ability to actually go out and execute on that, where you're not going to drastically increase your pricing. So before you make that and again, we're looking at the same things, but before you make that move, you really need to consider what does it truly cost and how easy is it to refactor and to replatform. And those are things that why we're looking at other alternatives. I mean, honestly, we've committed ourselves to VMware for a long time. Many of us have. Nutanix was something that was on our roadmap. It just was the end of the year. Now it's right now. And the reason for that is, there are folks that want to switch. Nutanix is offering, services to go out there and credits for VMware customers and things like that. And I've used the tech before. It's good tech. And they're not the only one, but I'm just giving you as an example. We will continue to look at other alternatives. I think this has just opened all of our eyes in the doors to taking a harder look and having these conversations, because at the end of the day, again, unbudgeted, out of budget cycle, and just unexpected, and there's a lot of noise, right? The boards are all wondering what's going on, and you see the communities and whatnot. So we're all in this together. We will help you through it, but I would just say I wouldn't pivot too quickly and then realize you actually hurt yourself more. The platform is a good platform. There's a reason why Broadcom felt they could do this. Just like any other of the providers, that as they get better in their tech and they get more market share, these things do occur. But so I'll flip it over to you, Sean.
Yeah, Rob, and I think you bring up a lot of good points there. I think if you're sitting inside your organization and thinking about what should we do here? I think, the first step is certainly being prepared, maybe, right? Like the idea is plan for the worst, hope for the best. But it is a little bit of waiting to see exactly what the economics of the changes are going to be. And then really just doing that kind of cost benefit analysis of thinking about the alternatives. I know what we heard, Rob, in these last few weeks from customers at conferences is that most organizations that have been on VMware for a long time are reliant on the tools that are provided in the platform, their operational skill set for their team, and the familiarity with the platform. And so, with change, comes risk, whether it's changing to, a different virtualization technology, or the risks of moving those to, just traditional VMs like a lift and shift to a hyperscaler. So I think that the question really is, there's going to be an increase in costs when you move to a subscription model. But is it outweigh, right, the costs of change and the risks associated with change to moving to new platforms, not as much familiarity, and certainly the risks that come with the unknown. So I think that's really the question is, can you find a good VMware-based solution that mitigates the costs increases, that allows your organization to continue to operate with the skill set and the familiarity and frankly, the proven nature of the platform? Or is it enough that it justifies those changes? And that's really, I think each organization is going to have a little bit unique challenge based on, where they're at and how things are within their organization and how much of that adoption they already have with software as a service and hyperscaler solutions. But I think we really just want to hammer home that, where this settles in may not be as bad as everybody thought. It's certainly going to enter into equations that, may make sense for certain virtual machines, certain work groups to move. But it may be that it's an increase in cost, but not enough to justify, the risk of replatforming. And so our guidance is definitely, be prepared, plan for the worst, hope for the best, and then make practical decisions that take into account, the skill set, your team, the risk to the business, the mission critical factors, et cetera.
Sean, I would just on that point, that's what we've done. And candidly, to all the participants, you heard a lot initially, mostly through Reddit, a couple press releases, and then every week you see additional, where Broadcom is, acknowledged that, there's unease, right, or whatever it may be. And really what we're finding is that as we react, and it's the larger service providers and larger customers that are getting heard, unfortunately, right, for a lot of the smaller service providers, they're no longer allowed to even resell the licensing, or actually provide that. So they're coming and looking for resell opportunities or a different model. I mean, they are in some pain, the smaller service providers for sure. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that, we're thinking about doing the right things for the customers, having that conversation, and again, it's whether it's you feel like you're locked in or not, we're all in the same boat. It is a subscription model pretty much anywhere you go. And there's a lot of other, technology that I would say that you can leverage. You hear about Proxmox or all these others, but I mean, there's a cost for R&D and the cost to switch and the risk, et cetera, like you mentioned, Sean. So I would, I would just echo what you were saying. You just need to think about it and understand what the impact is. And then you make the assessment, but it's okay to start POCing and doing all that stuff. And we're doing it as well.
Yep, absolutely. So our next slide here just is an illustration of just one example of how you look at or potentially weigh the options. And again, there's so many variables here, right? I think there's certainly a variable here around what's the average size of the virtual machine in your environment, right? This illustration is based on a pretty large machine, 16 gigs and 4 vCPU. So the average size of a virtual machine in your environment may be different. The number of virtual machines in your environment, right? Like the idea of the scale of 100 virtual machines and 1,000 is very different. There's different variables around how redundant and resilient your environment may need to be. Are you leveraging some different platform technologies or leveraging containers? So there's a lot that goes into these cost analyses. What I would tell you is that we're just from the Light Edge standpoint, we're very familiar and have been doing cost comparisons, cost assessments, total cost of ownership exercises for several years. And so if there's a situation where y'all would want to get a little bit more specific example for your environment, we're absolutely happy to provide that sort of guidance at no cost. But you can see in just this illustration, if the average virtual machine compared to let's say how you're deploying that today on premise or maybe on equipment you own that you co-locate, where you're providing all the licensing and managing it, all the way up through a situation where you're doing a dedicated cloud environment, a multi-tenant VMware powered environment, or even that sort of t-shirt sized virtual machine in a hyperscaler, in this case, let's say Azure. You can see that the cost comparisons, and again, there's a lot of variables here, but generally speaking, the Broadcom changes to the virtual machine or to the VMware licensing model offer benefits for large environments, and especially where the proportions of RAM to cores is higher. And so when you have the ability to more customize or tailor those situations, you can see that, especially at scale, you can really break down that unit economic of a price per VM at scale in dedicated environments. Perpetual licensing, if that licensing line item in your annual costs goes up, 2x, 3x, it starts to drive that price per VM up, more than in the past. How much, yet to be seen and dependent on your environment. But there's advantages on your, for how you deploy your infrastructure. And if you're lucky that your licensing is timed to, your depreciation schedule for your compute, you can build similar core or RAM dense per core deployments or bombs to minimize those cost increases. But no matter how you shake it, I think what we would say is that everything's within a reasonable range in terms of cost. Whether it's continuing to do it on a subscription model on premise and a co-location provider, moving it to a dedicated or multi-tenant VMware-based cloud, or up into, again, just lift and shift. We're not talking about platform exclusive or native services. that definitely make more sense to be run in hyperscaler environments. But I think the idea here is that the costs are probably within a reasonable range or in that fairway where the analysis makes sense, but I don't know that it's justifying knee-jerk reactions or strong overcorrections to replatform or make kind of those rash decisions. I think instead it's, hey, there's an analysis here worth doing. You probably have some time to do that since you have until when your renewal date is. And there's time to do the analysis and really take into those factors. But we would recommend you got to rationalize that down to a price per service that you deliver. Maybe it's a price per virtual machine, a different catalog of virtual machines, but then taking into consideration backup, disaster recovery, those sorts of things. But generally speaking, from a light edge perspective, our dedicated platform, which represents about 2/3 of our cloud customers today, does have a favorable position with some of the licensing changes under Broadcom that make that a very cost-effective solution, certainly going forward. So real quick, I'll make sure to say we are doing this live. So if y'all have questions that you want any of us to pose to the group or answer here live, make sure to drop them into the Q&A section, and we will do our best to address those as we go forward. But Rob, from your experience, previous to Light Edge, I think you mentioned managing a pretty large Azure bill and Azure deployment. From your perspective, when you think about the cost comparisons, with your experience in Azure, what guidance would you give to the group as they start thinking about where they should be making some of these hosting decisions?
Yeah, I mean, one is, as you're looking at this, you could say, hey, you guys are biased. You're showing this in favor to yourself. At the end of the day, like doing traditional VMs inside of the cloud, like hyperscalers, I'll say, it's expensive. It just truly is. And that's why I was talking about you really need to think about doing cloud native, learning how to auto scale, turn on, turn off. I mean, the clock always runs. So you need to think about how to do it right. There are a lot of companies out there that can help you from a professional services standpoint, but those aren't cheap engagements either. So again, I would just say be measured. Yes, again, there's a lot of reaction around this, but at the end of the day, it isn't. When we looked at it, we started to go, oh, it's not that bad. And listen, maybe that's changes happened every week though, since we've started this process, and maybe that's what they're going for, is you initially throw something out there and then you start to get a sense and like, oh, it's not that bad, but it's still an increase. And hence, their job is to boost their bottom line as a company. This is one where you look at it, you can go out on the public calculators and you can see that is your cost. And you need to think about it. Something here we've got on Sean's slide is our configuration does assume N+1. So don't just go out and configure a VM and think, oh, this isn't correct. Once you think about the VM, the network, the licensing for the VMs, the storage, all of those things start to really add up. So just be mindful. And again, ask for help. Like, we're happy to have the conversation. Again, we're all in it. Every provider that I've talked to, competitors, we have lots of friends in the space. Everyone's dealing with it. So, but historically, we have been cheaper on a per VM basis in our dedicated private cloud. We do offer multi-tenant as well, and we're optimizing some of that as we speak to make sure that we remain competitive. But it's a different model. I mean, you can do a lot of things like containers, and you can use your Terraform scripts and you name it in our environment. But you really do need to make sure you're thinking about it holistically and what it's going to take, rather than just wholesale move, which I think everyone, Sean, to your point, like everyone said, oh, cloud first 5 years ago, whatever the time frame has been now. And now we're saying, hey, what's the right cloud for the right workload? The combination of SaaS versus dedicated versus hyperscaler. What makes the most sense? Latency all matters, user performance. So it really does come down to what's right for your business. And I was actually in a spot where we were in the wrong spot at that time because we just moved very large VMs into that environment. Yes, we liked to use some of the services that they had, but it was super punitive. And to a certain degree, so is, the changes that Broadcom made. There's a commitment that we all have to make from a from a service provider perspective, or from you as a customer perspective, where you commit to a certain amount for, anywhere between 1 and 5 years. And if you go over your commit, it isn't at the committed rate, it's at retail, right? But guess what? So is in Azure, as an example, if you don't do reserved instances or the savings plan. So just think through it, spend the time. I wouldn't make any rash decisions. We're doing the same. And I'll talk about some of that on the next slide around just our take, as we proceed.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. That's great insight. And Travis, thanks for the question. In the chat, do those cloud numbers include bandwidth? On this slide, they do not. And Travis, I'll run you through at least my thoughts on why we excluded that. The first reason is really that there's an apples and oranges conversion when you think about bandwidth or connectivity from different providers. Within our offering, LightEdge's offering, we're how much bandwidth do you commit to, and a 95th percentile on bandwidth, not data transferred. The second reason I think we decided to carve the bandwidth part of the conversation out for now is because there's some rumors around ingress and egress charges being removed from certain hyperscaler providers. It's yet to be seen if that's actually going to be the case. But the way that we posed this configuration or cost comparison was, compute, so vCPU and memory, average amount of storage per virtual machine, the idea of a backup, so not an availability zone configuration, but just a snapshot, as well as support, right? So like in this case, the Azure add-on of getting support, or maybe in a DIY, you're factoring in a relationship with, anything that's external to your support and maintenance that you're getting through a manufacturer today. And we also don't know how that's going to change, because one of the big changes with this VVF licensing that we talked about earlier is that your support's now going through who you buy the licensing from, not to VMware. And how will those things be, monetized or cost structured with the value-added resellers, trusted advisors, et cetera. But so that's that. I will say that the cost of bandwidth is excluded here. But what I will say is that it was excluded because typically those costs are unpredictable and very high in the hyperscalers. And in this case, we weren't sure if that was going to continue to be the case, but LightEdge's internet offering has typically been much less from an expense side.
John, I see we had a question, and I'll actually answer it on the next slide as well. And I think Duncan did. Duncan is going to post that, or the team's going to post it in the chat, but we're 100% on-prem. If VMware becomes too expensive for us, have you tested and POC'd any of the other alternatives like Nutanix or other open source solutions? And what are your thoughts on those? So if you wouldn't mind.
Great segue to our next slide there.
Yeah, to the next slide, actually. And keep the questions coming. Just so you know, Duncan he's what I'll call the big brain and the guy with the best name in the company and beard. So definitely fire away. He can answer them. But we're going to double down on our ability to make sure we take care of our clients, period. I mean, that is at its core who we are, Midwest based, like just 100% US support. And we realize that like VMware, while this is disruptive, they've got like 75-ish or so % of the market share just in general. They do a great job. So we are going to continue to invest in that platform. We are going to make sure we're doing it the right way, though, like thinking about the cores and number of hosts you have and continuing to leverage, the benefits that we can. We will do more things on our DR as a service offerings, honestly, where any machine that's powered on, obviously, you get hit with. So we'll do more scripting to make sure that we spin up ourselves, right? Making sure we're doing auto scaling for DR events and those type of things. And we will help you do that as well. But it is a great platform, and it's something that's managed, very well today, and probably with your teams and ours as well. But alternate solutions to the question, we are actually Right now, we're heavily engaged. We're in the Nutanix Elevate cloud service provider program. So we are actively entertaining POCs for customers. So we have our lab environments and we have a staging environment. We've partnered with a couple VARs in the space that are actually working with us around the configurations, and then Nutanix directly around their lab equipment and all the things you can do and how easy it is to actually migrate those workloads. And really part of that process is, other than just saying, yes, we'll help you migrate, it's let's do a deep dive. There's a migration tool. What are the like for like features that you may have today? Because what we don't want to do is say, yes, we can do it. And everyone gets excited and we're going to spend less money. And all of a sudden we move you over and, 20% of your features just broke. That is not a success. And so, again, we will be measured and have those conversations with you. But yes, Nutanix, we do feel that, again, that's an established player in the space. Azure Stack is probably the other route we will go. That allows you to have, Azure Stack itself, as it says, in an HCI platform within your customer prem, or at our location, right? And it allows us to talk to that. And it does get your data to a place where you know where it is. A little more control from that perspective, but you're still, think about latency sensitive apps. You can now extend, the Azure piece into your environment, regardless of what the hyperscaler is. But why we like that one, Azure did a good job, honestly, of they did this years ago where they pushed Azure credits onto customers at the CIO level, probably, I want to say probably 6-7 years ago, where your discounts were then given to you in credits. So they kind of forced you to go try it. So again, Broadcom's not the first company that's done this. This is just part of, unfortunately, the business and the chaos that ensues around technology. But in the other part is we actually are now managing dedicated private clouds on customer premise. We can do that for other small service providers that didn't make the cut and can't buy the licensing. We can actually provide you I'll call it a co-managed solution where, we're very clear about roles and responsibilities, giving you an environment that allows you a lot more control. We want to make sure that we don't stifle your DevOps. If you can't have your team integrating or interfacing with that platform, and our SLAs are so stringent that you see no value or we actually make you go backwards, and then that's a fail. So that is one that we're doing, but we allow you to actually have, whether it's co-managed VCD, vCloud Director, and, have that actual portal experience. So those are the things that we'll allow you to do. We'll make sure that we're managing those on premise, and we expect to do the same with Nutanix and Azure Stack. Yes, there's a cost to us to make sure we're spinning up those teams, but actually we're making some pretty exciting investments, which we'll be announcing here, in the coming weeks, that actually help us accelerate those quickly. So it's very exciting. Yeah, there's a lot of alternatives. I would just say years ago I was asked about OpenStack. It was probably 2012-ish, 13, I can't remember. And it was, hey, OpenStack is free. Why aren't you using that? Why are you using VMware? And my response was, it is not free. There's a lot of development that's required, R&D, to make sure that it's highly available, that all your features work, and then all your updates and the security. So at the end of the day, yes, you could say, hey, we could just do this ourselves, but be careful, you get what you pay for at times. And that isn't one that I would venture down lightly. And I've pushed back on that just out of this, really focused on providing enterprise grade virtualization services, hyperscaler service and support. You have to be able to leverage partners versus the guy or gal in the corner or someone on a community at the end of the day if your business is in trouble. So just something to think about there.
Yeah. And Steve, thanks for the question in the chat there. I think, we've got another question in from Brian around, VMware, basically support knowledge articles going behind a paywall. I think our next slide has some good example FAQs we've heard recently as well. What we do know for sure, Brian, is that if you purchase VVF licensing, you will be working with multiple tiers of support with your value-added reseller or the organization that you purchase that licensing through. And the interactions with support, VMware, part of VMware strategy there is relying on third parties for, the organizations that are smaller than their top couple hundred customers, right? What I don't think we know, I don't know if Duncan or Rob, if you've heard anything about, knowledge base or wiki type stuff from VMware moving, behind a paywall. Is that anything that we've heard about so far?
They have mentioned that they will be removing those for authorized providers. So I think even registered providers, however, can register without meeting minimum core counts and still have access to those.
So the devil's in the details, I would say, depending on how much pushback, they may loosen that up a bit. And again, I say that because they've made changes every single week. Not to the day that the licensing is going live, but just to the program, so which we've had to adjust daily. So if we do find that out, we will share. But as of right now, I don't know that we have a concrete answer.
Yeah.
I see another question. Is LightEdge considering offering Broadcom white label licenses for customers who do not qualify for the 3,000 core minimum? And I think it's 3,500, but I'm waiting for clarification. As of right now, no. And the reason why is because we've been told that, let's just say you're a smaller company and you want, you want 1,000 cores, right? And we would have to commit, because our commits, obviously, we've got tens of thousands of cores. We would have to commit on a named basis, a named account basis, to for 3 years for those cores. And anything that you go above and beyond, you do pay retail, and you have to upgrade in 1,000 core chunks. But there's a lot of risk associated with that. And then I've heard the margin is low single digit. So a lot of risk for a business like us if we were to start going out and reselling. And what happens, God forbid, company goes out of business, company gets acquired. Like, we just don't know enough yet. And so I am waiting. We're talking with our licensing aggregators, and those folks, you think about distribution, and those are the people that are providing the licensing, Ingram, Micros, Insight Directs, et cetera. And the answers that they've had have been pretty slow as well. Just communication has not been great. So just something to think about, is just right now, white label is not something that we want to do. Well, we want to do it. We just can't do it in the current confines. If they relax that and allow that not to be named, whereas I can move those licenses and make it portable, because we're growing and we're going to continue to grow, and I know we'll consume more licensing, then I'd be fine with that. But as of right now, they've just made it very painful for us. I would just say for all of us. And then I saw another one. Have you heard that Nutanix is going to change their licensing structure and even lower its pricing to get more people from VMware to it? We're heavily in discussions with them right now around all things licensing. I have not heard that they're going to lower it. I know that they're offering free periods of licensing and free migration and a lot of incentives. Everyone has had to do price increases on some level within this industry because of inflation and everything. If they were to lower it, that'd be great, but I'd want to get that committed in term of something that can't be canceled, because at the end of the day, they can lower it and they could do a price increase again. But what I do like is it's not punitive, meaning when you commit to a certain level, like we as a service provider, we commit to a certain level, anything that goes over it, it's charged at that level. So think about it now. We commit to, and I'm making it up, 20,000 cores. All of a sudden we go to 20,500. I have 500 of those get charged at retail. And then what do I do to the customers where we're not coterminous with our VMware licensing? So it's a huge challenge, and not very, I'll call it cloudy, unfortunately. But I'm hoping that they do, start to hear feedback and listen and make those changes over time, whether it's VMware. But Nutanix is, I would say, less punitive from that perspective, and more friendly service provider and cloud friendly.
Yeah, I think Rob, on the question around, when's the planned date for these changes for the cloud service provider model, those changes are imminent.
Yeah.
And so for the smaller, it was an anonymous question there into the chat, but for the smaller cloud service providers who, are probably like you're a regional managed service, IT managed service outsourcing provider. You have a cloud, but you're also doing, help desk outsourcing for SMBs, et cetera. Those changes are tied to Broadcom's date of April 1st for the cloud service provider model changes. For the enterprise, for an organization on perpetual, those dates are based on when your renewals are. So just to be really clear, we have not heard anything about accelerating those changes for moving from perpetual to subscription. The other thing I would say is for some of our customers who are co-location customers of LightEdge's today, they have a small VMware-based cloud platform along with their managed service offering and IT outsourcing. We've had conversations not about white labeling the licensing to overcome that gap between the number of cores you have and the 3,500 core commit. But we have had conversations about moving those offerings to LightEdge's dedicated private cloud with the VCF core-based licensing. And surprisingly, the amount of margin required for that line of business as it is today is something that can be accomplished or achieved with that kind of solution. So if that's something that you're interested in discussing further, we're happy to jump on and kind of take a look at it. I know there's a lot of criteria around like, hey, maybe those, we just refreshed the computer a year ago, and that's a challenge, right? But we're certainly happy to dig in. We've done it for probably five or six cloud service providers that we have in our colo that have 500 cores, 1,000 cores, not 3,500.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the configuration of your environment, it's a conversation, right? And we'll have to get into, obviously, the roles and responsibilities and some of the legalese around who owns the equipment. But there are scenarios where we absolutely, could take over at least the licensing and management of that allows you to then co-manage. If you've got newer hardware, if it's older, then we could probably just get you into a refresh on our current environment, like Sean's saying. And again, you still do what makes you special, right? If you're a service provider and you're managing services and running, other services for your clients, you can do that. And again, we're not going to hamper you. We want to make sure, obviously, we do the right things, that the environment is up and running, that you hold us accountable to SLAs, we hold ourselves accountable, those type of things. But it's a conversation, and we're happy to have it.
Yeah, I think, and there's one other good question on this slide, and I think Rob and Duncan, maybe some insight from you would be really helpful, which is, what about midterm changes on pricing? When you think about moving from perpetual to subscription, we know that at least what we've seen so far is, you're good through your renewal date. But once you're moved to the subscription model, whether it's a LightEdge cloud service provider model or an enterprise on VVF, what risk do folks have around VMware escalating those rates during those 3-year commitments? Is that something that's been discussed, or do we have any sense of what that risk is?
I mean, on the 3-year, and Duncan, feel free to weigh in, but I mean, whatever we commit to in 3 years, we were being told that's the rate. Anything above the commit is retail. I'd like to see that get moved to your committed rate, or some version of it. But we would co-term you, especially. I mean, we have a larger commit, so there's moves and adds we can do where we can actually co-term you. If there's some abnormal amount of risk associated with it, I'm making it up, pretend you're Bitcoin player or whatever it may be, and you're wanting to leverage that technology, which you may or may not. We just have to be careful about just getting stuck with a lot of licensing from a service provider perspective. But the majority of the use cases, we'll just we would just co-term it in rate, or we would, to the end of your agreement or whatever it may be. Or if you want to do a renewal for longer, we can get aggressive on pricing too. But Dylan, I don't know if you have thoughts there.
Yeah,
So-
no, I think you covered it. They've talked about allowing us to increase our commit in the middle of a term at the initial rate. So we should be able to maintain this.
Yeah, I think everything we've seen from the folks that have changed from perpetual to subscription models for, their premise, VVF subscriptions, at least from our perspective, it doesn't look like there's, any gotchas there in terms of Broadcom and VMware honoring those kind of commitments in those models. So appreciate everybody dropping questions in the chat, make it interactive. If anybody has any last minute questions they would like to pose, we will definitely, answer those. Can certainly follow up with dropping an email at info@lightedge.com, or if you're a LightEdge client, working with your client experience or account manager for any questions or deeper dives you want to take. But it looks like we're done with the question queue there. So thanks for everybody who took almost an hour out of their Tuesday to jump on and join the conversation and making it interactive. So appreciate the attendance. And we got, Steve saying thanks. Thank you, Steve, for coming. So appreciate everybody jumping on. If you want to get more specific or dig more into your specific situation with some of our experts, please feel free to reach out. We're, like Rob said, we're in this together, and we're looking to help and advise any way that we can as we all navigate these transitions. So thanks again for joining. Appreciate it. And we'll certainly talk to some of you offline if you want to.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you.